Hi everyone, this is Ricky Spencer and welcome to another episode of Our Health Matters. And today we have got an incredible guest. For so long, I've gone through the archives and said who are the people that we really need to hear the voices of. And I thought, of course, we need to speak with Uncle Charles Pakana. This is a wonderful elder who has done so much work in the area of media representation for First Nations people in Victoria. He has provided a landscape where we can hear news which is authentic, which comes from living experience, the voices of community. Thank you, Uncle Charles Pakana, for coming on to our show today.
Oh, Ricky, I'm really excited to be here. Thanks for the opportunity.
So let's start the journey. What was it that got you interested in journalism?
Nothing to do with social matters. I was one of the very early information technology journalists. So it started in around about early 1980s, just before I left the army, because I joined the army in 1975. Did 9 years, but I became very interested in technology, in the burgeoning home computer market. And I started writing little articles for some of the magazines that were happening, and it just progressed from there. I became a full-time freelance journalist, working across magazines such as Your Computer, Australian Personal Computer, Computer World, all those rags that were around at the time and being pushed out like crazy. That's what got me into it, but into what I'm doing now, which is more socially focused, especially in the black space. That really started probably around about 9 or 10 years ago. And that was the result of, at the time I was here in Melbourne, I was employed as the Aboriginal Liaison Officer at Banyule City Council. And mate and I went and visited radio station 3KND, which is Victoria's only Aboriginal radio station. And the station manager at that time, who was one of the fathers of Indigenous radio in Australia, Uncle Jim Remedio, is now unfortunately passed. He was sitting in as the station manager and he said, "Oh, I love your voice. We've got to get you on radio." And I said to him, "As long as it's not music and you let me do some current affairs, we've got a deal." So it started off then with Connection Matters Radio. Was the first program I had. It was just 2 days a week, just for half an hour or an hour, I can't remember really, and just interviewing people local in Melbourne, but First Nations people who were making a difference and who had a really strong story to tell. So that's where it started.
What sort of led you to sort of see that there was more of a need for that?
I think the real need for it came about because I recognised that when I was looking for stories, there were very few resources I could go to find out, well, who's been speaking out on this? I mean, yes, the mainstream media did a bit of coverage, but it was very tokenistic, or it was very sporadic. I'd go to publications such as Koori Mail, NIT, National Indigenous Times, which are great publications, or to NITV, radio and television. But there was nothing that was focused that I could see specifically on Victoria. Now, I'd been born and bred in New South Wales, moved down to Victoria probably around about 20 years ago, but fell in love with the community. And I just saw so much happening. And I mean, this has been borne out, of course, with the fact that Yoorrook Justice Commission, treaty, so much work done in campaigning on the Yes campaign. I know we're going to get to those later, but I just thought I really wanted to do my own thing when it came to sharing some of these stories, promoting some of these stories, and the amazing people, First Nations people here in Victoria, and there are so flaming many of them. So the story, and I'll try to cut it short, was I had a row, I'd been employed as the treaty correspondent on 3KND. This is radio only. And that was 3 days a week, 3 or 4 days a week. And what I preferred to do, this is before we had the assembly. So Auntie Jill Gallagher, an amazing Gurudjamara woman, I know you know her, was the Victorian Treaty Advancement Commissioner travelling around Victoria, spruiking up treaty, trying to build up the Aboriginal electoral roll and getting people to nominate for the first People's Assembly of Victoria. So I followed her around a fair bit, and then I would travel to other areas to get interviews with those people who had nominated to be elected to go on to the Assembly. And the station manager said to me, right, no more travelling. You will do all your interviews from the studio. And I remember going home to my mother, and I was looking after my mother at this stage, the last few years of her life, and saying, you know, when you're gone, Mum, I'm going to get rid of everything. I'm going to move into a mobile home of some sort. I'm going to travel around Victoria, record these stories on my own and give them away for free. And that's what sort of happened 4.5 years ago. 5 years ago, Mum died. I gave everything away. I moved into a van, started up Victorian Aboriginal News, and that's now what I do. Travel around Victoria, spruik up treaties, share stories from people. It's just some amazing people.
What do you think is one of the advantages of being able to be so mobile and going into people's homes and spaces and hearing their stories within their own place?
That's exactly it, Ricky. It's getting into their places, sitting with them in their homes, actually going out onto their country where they're comfortable, and then letting them share their story. And I mean, I'm honoured that I can actually be trusted by these people to share those stories. It's an amazing opportunity. The number of times where I've been out on country and people have said to me, oh, thank God, no other journalist ever comes out here. Because I'll be up at Mildura doing a video interview or a radio interview on the banks of the Murray at Mildura. Or one of the great interviews I did was with a fellow called Joey Saunders, or Joseph Saunders, who's, I think, the general manager, if I've got that wrong, my apologies, at Budge Bim down in Gunditjmara country in the southwest of the state. But getting out there, otherwise these people would not have the opportunity to share these stories. And it matters for them, and it matters for all community, all Victorian community, to hear those stories where people are sitting down, they're comfortable, they're relaxed, and they're surrounded by their people and their culture. It makes a difference.
And when you're hearing that, and I can feel the love of which and passion that you do that, I guess for our listeners, for people listening, what is one key advice that you would offer people who want to, say, follow in your footsteps, who love the idea of hearing about storytelling, and they want to work with community, maybe they're an ally, and they want to just go talk to people and give people a platform? What is one of the most important things that you give them?
Listen. It's all about listening. It comes back to one of the things I don't particularly like about a lot of journalists nowadays. When you see them on or hear them on radio or on TV, they inject themselves into the story. You quite often you'll see them say, "Oh well, Ricky, tell me about your experiences with XYZ." Now, even before you can answer, they may say, "Because I've had these experiences." They inject themselves into it. The audience doesn't want to hear that. They want to hear your story. And that's the important thing. Learn to ask the questions that elicit responses and just build on that. All you're doing is you're providing an opportunity for someone to share their lived experiences, to share their knowledge, not yours. That's the big thing. You're facilitating storytelling from someone else. You're not telling your own story. That is the biggest bit of advice that I give to all young journalists on any matter, for example.
And when you give the opportunity for someone to tell their story, what sort of ways do you communicate to the person that that story is sacred and that you'll protect its integrity? Because some of the things that we hear these days is that people now with digital media, things can get put on Twitter and taken out of context. How do you manage that in your work?
Well, we can't provide a 100% guarantee. anybody can take any recording that's out there and butcher it to their heart's content. We see that on social media all the time. You know, we've seen politicians do it. We've seen conservative media do it. Where I gain the support and the confidence of the people I'm interviewing is A, they know what I do and they've heard what I do. B, rarely do I go live to air. So if someone has said something that they later on think, oh, I shouldn't have said that, then they can come back to me and they can take it down and request it. Now, we actually had that recently with one of the main treaty organisations, and I won't say which. One of the leaders who I'd interviewed had said something that was inappropriate, that upset some people. They called me. We took that episode down immediately, did an edit. This is about 12 o'clock at night, and then had it reposted again. So there's a reaction thing. It's not a case of, oh, you've said it, therefore we can use it. You've got to give that respect.
And Uncle, the work that you do, is it something that can be learnt, or do you feel it comes from within, something that's passed through your ancestors?
Look, I'm not a trained journalist. I didn't even finish high school. I went straight from fourth form or year 10 in high school to join the army, and after 9 years in the army, just made my way into journalism. I was very fortunate that my mother, who was an ex-English teacher, edited every single thing I wrote until I became somewhat more competent and confident. She did the same thing with my father, who was also a journalist. He was the industrial correspondent at the Sydney Morning Herald up until he died in 1975. He only went to fourth class in school. Wow. So he needed a lot more training than I did and support from my mother. But look, it's not something that I was taught to do. Although I was fortunate in that for about, I think, 10, 15 years, whilst I was still a journalist, I also ran a small company called Australian Corporate Writing. And I would do case studies for clients on their clients. For example, we had Microsoft as one of our biggest clients. So we would go into various Microsoft software using businesses and we'd interview them. You know, how are you using the software? What business challenges does it meet? So that was a huge training exercise for me in asking questions and getting the stories out. There's no real, from my perspective, I think, skill in doing this, except for what I said before, Ricky, and that's asking a couple of questions and listening. But the other thing, and I'll just throw this in now, this is my next favourite bit of advice I give journalists. Rarely should you ever ask a question that can be answered with a yes or a no. It's the basics of asking questions: who, what, when, where, why, how. People can't answer yes or no unless they're being awkward. So that's the best thing to do. But everyone has a story. I mean, you know this, you speak to people all the time. Everyone's got a story to tell. And most times they want to tell it. You give people the opportunity. You let them know that they're going to be safe in your hands and they'll tell your story.
What advice would you give for, especially for young Indigenous people who may be watching this and think, you know what, I want to do that. I want to, you know, become a journalist, a storyteller. Why is it important for more of our younger mob to go out there and do the work that you do?
It's important because First Nations people, whether they're Aboriginal, Torres Strait Islander, First Peoples, First Nations, whatever they want to be called, quite often they're going to be more comfortable with one of their own mob telling the story. The number of times that I've seen non-Aboriginal journalists go up to a First Nations elder and ask an inappropriate question, and the result being either an horrific response or just no response at all. I can't begin to count the number of times because I have seen it many, many times. What's important is that if we are to protect the stories and continue the truth-telling that's going on right across Australia right now, then we need to have journalists, correspondents who can engender that comfort with the people they're speaking to. That's going to be critical. So my advice to them would be go and do it. There are some great apprenticeships out there, even if it means you start off and you do freelance work. I've seen so many young Aboriginal and Torres Strait Island journalists give it a try. They do a great job and they get picked up. I've seen them picked up by NITV. There are great opportunities. You ring up the Koori Mail newspaper and you pitch a story to them. Now, these will pay you. There are great paid opportunities out there. And from there, I can tell you right now, NITV is only growing. Koori Mail, NIT, National Indigenous Times, they're growing. They're going to get bigger. Demand for their content is going to be more and more. It's phenomenal. First Nations radio stations, you've got Karma up north, 3KND down here, various others around the country. There's more and more demand for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander journalists. Now's the time. And it's a great opportunity. It's not easy, but now's the time.
With the change in the media landscape that we've seen in the past decades, that we shifted from, as you mentioned, as you started, we had magazines, a proliferation of computer magazines to newspapers, to local newspapers. Has that changed the way you consider when you are telling your stories and interviewing people, when you're thinking about how am I going to capture this and preserve that footprint?
When I started, community newspapers, and we're talking about when I started, 40 years ago, community newspapers were a great way just to tell and share little local stories of interest. They were absolutely fabulous. What we've seen though since 2020 in particular, I'm not quite sure what it is around the rest of the country, but here in Victoria, local newspapers have been really on the decline. So many of them closed down for good. I discovered that podcasting was the way forward. Now, people have always said to me, do videos, go on YouTube and all that. But quite frankly, podcasting is something I'm comfortable with. So that's important, to find a media form with which you're comfortable. And speaking, I'm comfortable about it. Being on camera, I am not comfortable in the least bit, and I don't know how you do it all the time.
Well, you're doing a great job now.
But I happen to like doing audio recording. I think it's great. It's a one-person thing. I just need to have my equipment, sit down and record, even if it's just my phone. And I know you can do that with video. But there's a greater deal of acceptance for podcasting now. People listen to podcasts. And it's exactly the same in podcasting as it is in print media and anywhere else as far as I'm concerned. You've just got to keep on trying and trying and trying. You've got to keep pushing them out. I started podcasting. I remember I got excited when I got 20 listeners. Now it's significantly more. We don't even know the numbers because the podcast is also carried on various radio stations around the state. But it has changed a lot. I think we need to be more immediate in many cases to get our content out. And therein lies a problem, Ricky, and I'm sure you've seen this in media, and I'm sure a lot of your viewers have as well, that everyone's trying to get the headline out now because we can get headlines out on Facebook, on X, on Instagram. So the duty of care when it comes to accuracy of the content is not there like it used to be, for example, when my father was a journalist in the 60s and the 70s. It's changed dramatically. So the responsibility is on this new age of journalists to make sure more than ever that they've got their story right and all their facts right before they hit the publish button.
You've done a lot of work and been involved in truth-telling with the Yoorrook Commission. Can you tell us what is that for those listeners who are a bit unclear?
Sure. So the Yoorrook Justice Commission, which wound up a couple of months ago, but it went on for 4 years, The story actually starts round about in early 2020 at the Aborigines Advancement League, where there was a chamber meeting of the First Peoples Assembly of Victoria.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the First Peoples Assembly of Victoria is that democratically elected body of Aboriginal representatives from across Victoria that has been working towards treaty with the state. At that meeting at the Aborigines Advancement League in early 2020, one of the members, and I was very fortunate to be there at the stage, Jason Kelly, put forward a motion that everyone knew there cannot be treaty without truth. So there was a call made from the Assembly to the state government. They set up a royal commission into the truth-telling history of Victoria. And the result of that was an incredible 4-year journey of the Yoorrook Justice Commission that finally handed its last report in a couple of months ago. So it was all about First Peoples coming forward and telling their stories, giving evidence, but even more than that, we had the Premier, Jacinta Allen, was called in, because of course a royal commission can do what it likes with regard to calling people, and you have to agree to it. So they called on papers, they called on documents, they called on people to give the evidence. The evidence is still up there. Submissions are up there as well. Even I gave a submission. So thousands of people gave submissions. And truth-telling will continue. So that's Yoorrook. My work with Yoorrook was to interview the commissioners. So I interviewed various commissioners over the years. Commissioner Bell, Commissioner Travis Lovett, Commissioner Sue Ann Hunter, who's now the first federal commissioner, I think, for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children, and credit to her, amazing. I remember interviewing Auntie Eleanor Burke, who was the chairperson of the Yoorrook Justice Commission, I think just a couple of weeks after the commission was established, and did that for NITV radio. It was an amazing piece of work, and I just wanted to, in my podcasting, just share their messages and share the challenges they were facing in getting this together and promoting as much as I could. And I, of course, do that same thing with treaty, which is a huge passion of mine.
Tell us a bit more about that. We hear that word bandied around sometimes, and for people who are listening, let's find out exactly, coming from you, Uncle Charles, one, what is treaty from your lens, and why it's important for everyone to be involved in it.
I'll just say up front, I'm not a Victorian traditional owner, so I'm a non-Victorian First Peoples. So my mob is not here in Victoria. Whilst I'm of Tasmanian descent, I am actually disconnected. So I have no traditional country or language or law. That's rife right across our industry, thanks to the acts of genocide that have been inflicted upon First Nations people. Treaty is something that was called for in 2016. I mean, it's been called for long before that, but the state government at Federation Square in 2016 said to the mob, "What do you want?" And this is a very, very shortened version. The cry was almost unanimous: we want treaty. So in 2018, the state government, with bipartisan support from the Conservatives and the sitting government, the ALP, passed the Advancing the Treaty Act 2018. And that saw the commencement of this work and the election of the First Peoples Assembly of Victoria in 2019. The job of that organisation, we're getting to what treaty is in a second, the responsibility of that organisation was to establish the type of treaty that would be carried out here in Victoria, to set up a self-determination fund, and to set up the Treaty Authority, which is that organisation, independent organisation, that oversees the conduct of treaty negotiations and treaty making. They sometimes call the umpires, but they don't like that term, and quite right. So the First Peoples Assembly of Victoria determined that there would be a hybrid treaty model, and this is an important thing in the treaty process, that there is a statewide treaty that encompasses all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders living in Victoria, whether they come from there or not. And then there are local treaties, which are negotiated by the traditional owner groups, such as the Gunditjmara, the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung, the Bunurong, for their particular areas and for their people. So there's that local, and then there's the statewide. What we've seen recently is the fruition of the work undertaken by the First Peoples Assembly for a statewide treaty, the first iteration of the first statewide treaty, or the first treaty in this country. It's now sitting before Parliament and has been for several weeks, where it will be debated and hopefully passed, and then passed up through the upper house. But what does treaty mean to me? Treaty means an opportunity for Victoria to move forward, for Victoria to embrace, first of all, First Nations culture, and to benefit from that, and to have them, all Victorians, feel proud of the fact that, oh, we're part of this culture. Because whenever you go to a welcome to country, this most unselfish and beautiful of ceremonies, where you're not being welcomed onto your own country, by the way, you're being welcomed onto traditional country and being asked to care for it. There is that coming together of all people. So there's that particular aspect of treaty, but there's also the important aspect of self-determination. Now, bear in mind, I have not been a part of treaty negotiations. As a journalist, I've been speaking to people such as Ngara Murray and Ruben Berg and others, those two co-chairs of the Assembly, and getting the information there. And I'm also sort of about a third of the way through reading the 250 odd pages of the legislation. Huge document. But from everything I see there, it's about self-determination. It's about First Nations people making decisions that impact on First Nations people. Now, if you had a group of straight white men making decisions on how funding for the LGBTIQIA+ community should be spent, there's something rotten there. They're not going to know the challenges of the LGBTQIA+ community, apart from the fact that some of these, privileged white men may say, oh yes, but I know a queer person. Oh yes, my daughter is trans. They simply don't know. It's the same thing in the First Nation space. The aspirations of the First Peoples Assembly of Victoria at this initial stage of treaty is wonderful. It's about having First Nations people advising the government on how monies should be spent. It's advising the government on the best policies and protocols to bring about to support the lives of First Nations people. And it's not giving anybody more than their due. It's at one level, from my perspective, this is just from my perspective, it's affording a degree of equity in order to achieve equality. Because without equity, you can't be treated equally. If you've got some people down there and some people up there, if you're treating them all equally, well, that's not going to work, because some people might need more to get up to that same level so they can be treated equally. That's where I see treaty at this stage taking us.
One thing that you mentioned, I wanted to ask you to perhaps send a message out there to mob that perhaps they may have children or relatives who have come out to perhaps later in life, that they find themselves either as transgender or, same-sex attracted. What advice would you give to people listening that may still be struggling with this and thinking, well, I don't know, is it cultural? Where do you position that?
I don't understand this cultural perspective or this cultural condemnation that some people might have against someone coming out or someone who's attracted to someone of the same sex. I don't get that. I really don't. Because You can't tell me that it was colonisation that brought queerness into the black community. That's just not right. So it obviously existed. I don't know how it was back before colonisation. I doubt many people do. I've always been an advocate of be true to yourself. Be safe, for God's sake, but always be true to yourself. If someone wants to come out and be gay, if someone wants to be trans or whatever, it's absolutely fine. And I found actually within gathering places, Aboriginal gathering places, there's a great deal of acceptance. We had a wonderful young person at our gathering place who was non-binary, assigned male at birth. I think that's the correct term.
Yes.
Yep, I was taught that recently. And they wore feminine clothing. They were more comfortable with females. And all the aunties loved them, absolutely loved them and embraced them. And there was no danger at all for that person, no cultural danger. Just be true to yourself. That's all I really believe anybody should be doing. If you're not hurting someone, go for it.
It's been absolutely wonderful, Uncle Charles, speaking with you, and your beautiful words of wisdom for everybody, not just for Indigenous people who may be LGBTIQ, but for everyone, that be safe. Acceptance is part of the health journey. And I wanted to thank all the listeners, Our Health Matters, Quest by Community, Uncle Charles Pakana. We have all the links that you can go and get involved in. Please support all the links and anything that you can do to help Treaty come alive. Treaty is for everyone across Victoria. I would like to also extend my wonderful acknowledgement of having Uncle Charles Pakana with us today.
Thanks so much indeed, Ricky. It's been a real blast.